Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you were to ask me what the single biggest turning point was from an editing perspective within my own landscape photography, sort of that, I guess that light bulb moment, that aha point, if you will, I'd have to say that my progressive shift away from using sliders and more towards applying filters was the turning point, so to speak, for me. In my eventual understanding of the difference between a global adjustment versus that of a local adjustment really has changed the way that I look at and edit my own photos. I really no longer look at my images in their totality. Rather, I see them as having kind of smaller subregions that when added together create the complete photograph. And rarely will you ever encounter an image, especially an outdoor or landscape image, that would not be greatly improved by using filters as opposed to that of sliders. Now, most landscape photos, they're usually comprised of areas of, say, highlights versus shadows, or areas that are maybe more saturated than other areas, or even regions of your image that have more contrast than other portions. And this uneven balance across and throughout your entire photo is the main use case for leaning more on filters rather than that of sliders. And I'll show you exactly what I mean right here. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit one photo, and I'm only going to use sliders or only going to use global adjustments. And then I'm going to edit that same photo only using filters or local adjustments. And then I'm going to compare those two end results together. And the results are pretty astonishing as far as the overall difference between utilizing global adjustments or sliders versus local adjustments or filters. So here is the image right here. And as you can see, this is a seascape image from the coast of Oregon with these amazing sea stacks and this little bird that was perfectly perched at the top right here. And I really want to bring in a lot of additional detail and a lot more of a color in the actual sky in the background here, because I think the sky is one of the most interesting components of this image. So I'm going to come over here. Probably one of the most common ways to do this is by reducing the overall amount of highlights. So I'm going to bring that down quite a bit. Maybe even bring the exposure down a touch just to really emphasize that sky. I think that's starting to look a little bit better right there. And maybe even bring down the exposure just a touch more. But now, as you can see, a lot of these sea stacks are very dark. So I'm going to bring up the shadows just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to bring them up quite a bit. So I'm going to bring back some of that detail in the seascapes, or in the sea stacks. I'm going to bring up the black some too. That's going to help bring out some of that detail as well and kind of brighten up those sea stacks just a bit. And then the white point, I think I'm going to bring the white point up just a touch right there. Maybe bring these shadows up a little bit more. Bring these highlights down a touch and reduce the exposure a little bit as well. And I think that looks good right there. Just a real quick edit, only utilizing sliders in the basic section, and which all, of course, are global adjustments. So now I'm going to go in here. I'm going to make a virtual copy of this photograph, and then let's re-edit it only using filters or local adjustments. So I'm going to come over here, right-click, create a virtual copy, and then let's go ahead and reset all of these adjustments right here. So reset. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to bring back a lot of this detail and really emphasize the sky up there, just like we did in the previous version. But this time we're going to utilize a graduated filter. So I'm going to come up here, graduated filter. I'm going to hold down the shift key because that's going to keep it perfectly straight. If you don't hold down the shift key, then it's more difficult to keep it straight. But if you just hold down the shift key, that'll keep it perfectly level. I think something about there looks good. Let's bring the exposure down just a touch. Bring the highlights down, something to about right there. Maybe even warm it up a little bit. Bring in maybe some magenta right through there. Oh yeah, that's really starting to come to life now. I think that looks good. And of course, let's refine it with a range mask because that filter is affecting the sea stacks. We don't want that. So I'm going to drag this over. I'm holding down the Option key so I can see the range mask. White reveals and black conceals, so only the areas in white are going to receive this edit. I'm just going to kind of refine this to maybe about right there, I think looks good. And then maybe not bring that exposure down quite that much, but bring the highlights down a little bit more. Let's pump some contrast in there as well, because that's going to add some structure and some definition in the overall clouds, is to kind of make the structure of the clouds kind of pop a little bit more. You can also do this by adding a little bit of a clarity as well, but you want to be careful with that because you don't want your clouds to appear too sharp or too, I guess, crunchy. You know, clouds are definitely soft, so you want them to kind of remain that soft quality, but sometimes adding a little bit of clarity in there will exaggerate or emphasize the structure of those clouds. So I think that that looks good right there. Should we do anything with the haze? Ooh, maybe a little bit. Maybe right there. Let's toggle this on and off. So that's before and after, and I like the way that that looks right there. Let's add another graduated filter for the foreground right through here. Something about right there. Let me hit the shortcut key O so we can see where that mask is. And I think that that looks good right there. What I really want to do here is I want to bring down these highlights some, but it's going to make that water start to become a little bit too dark or reduce the exposure, and I really don't want that. I just want to bring out a little bit more detail in the water, but I'm going to boost up the exposure again. So I'm going to bring the highlights down, maybe bring up a little bit of the exposure, introduce a little bit of, increase the white some, and then let's add a bunch of contrast into this area right through here. I think that that looks good. Actually, I'm going to bring this white point down, bring the contrast up, and I think I'm just going to put the exposure back to 0 and just bump the whites up just a little bit right there. And maybe we could do a little bit something with the overall clarity, just a touch as well. Toggle this on and off. That's before and after, before and after. And so far it's coming together nicely. Now I want to add a radial filter to that top right-hand corner. I'm not sure if you noticed it or not, but there's a little area of the sky up there where it's getting a little bit overdone. It's kind of like a hot spot there. So I want to go ahead and resolve that. And this is the area I'm talking about right here. So I'm going to come up here to the radial filter. Let's drag this all the way over this region here. I always like to start with the midpoint on the edge so you get a nice kind of gradual feather transition. I'm going to drag this out just a little bit more. I think that looks good right there. And then let's just reduce the overall exposure of that just a touch. Bring down those highlights a little bit. And let's toggle that on and off before and after. So just a touch, nothing too wild, but that area was kind of becoming a little bit of a distraction because it was just kind of an area of pure white, and I didn't want that. I wanted to bring back some of that detail through there. Now we're going to come over here and I want to bring out a little bit of the detail in this bottom area of the C stack right through here. It looks a little bit dark. I'm going to do that with a radial filter as well. I'm going to drag this right through here. I think something real simple right there looks good. And we're just going to bring up the exposure just a touch. Nothing too wild, nothing like that. About right there, I think looks good. And then we're also going to, you know, I really want to emphasize this crashing wave right here, the smaller ripple, I should say. It's not really a wave, but let's just duplicate this. Duplicate, drag it right over here. Something about like that looks good, I think. Gonna bring this down some. Let me hit the shortcut key O so I can see where that mask is targeting. Something right there. And then let's, I don't want to bring the exposure up quite that much, just a little bit. Maybe add a little bit of contrast in there. Maybe just a touch of clarity. You can see what that clarity does. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. Maybe even increase the highlights just a little bit, mainly because I want to make sure that that wave or that ripple doesn't get lost in the overall image. So I want to bring a little bit of attention to that area because it's great midground interest. And then let's toggle that on and off. That's before and after. So you can see it just kind of lightly highlighted it, but it just increased the odds that the viewer looking at this photograph might not miss it. So just wanted to brighten that up a little bit, bring a little bit of direction to that or attention to that area. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to come over here into, actually I'm going to stick with the radial adjustments, and I want to kind of lightly dodge these areas right through here because if I brighten this side where the light is naturally hitting and I leave this side dark, it's going to create a lot of three-dimension structure in this C stack, and that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to select new, let's drag a radial filter right across this area here, kind of turn it to the right a little bit. I think something like that looks good. And for this, I am going to use a range mask. Let's use a luminance range mask and drag that over. Whoops, I'm going to drag the opposite side here. So I really just want to make sure I don't affect the sky at all. So something right through there I think looks good. Let's bump up that exposure just a touch, nothing too crazy. Make sure that's enough to affect it. Yes, I think that looks good. I'm going to right click, duplicate it, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. So really wherever there is light hitting these C-stacks, I just want to emphasize it just a little bit. I'm not adding multiple stops of exposure to this area. I just want to brighten it up a little bit because that contrasting light against the shadows that are naturally existing in this photograph is going to add that 3-dimension and structure to these C-stacks. Drag this over here. I think something like that looks good. I think I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit more on this one though. And then let's do one more on the opposite side here. Oops, grab it again. Gotta make this one much smaller though. Something like that, I think. Just toggle that on and off. Yes, I think that looks good right there. And then I also want to go back here. I forgot to do this earlier. I want to add a graduated filter just to this immediate foreground area right here. A lot of times if you darken down the immediate foreground or brighten up the immediate foreground and let it either go from dark to light or from light to dark, that just adds a little bit of additional depth in your overall photograph. So I always like to do that in the foreground areas of pretty much all of my images. So I think that looks good. Let me hit the shortcut key O just to make sure that that transition is not too abrupt. And I think that looks good. And I'm just going to just darken this down just ever so slightly. I'm going to drag this out a little bit more because I want that transition to be a little bit softer. And I think maybe not even quite that much. Maybe about right there looks good. And then last but not least, I want to add a vignette to this photograph. So I'm going to drag a giant circle around here. I'm going to add, and I always like to add a custom vignette, and I'll show you exactly why. It's really cool because you have complete control whenever you utilize a custom vignette versus the actual vignette slider inside of Lightroom. You don't have quite as much control as you do with this technique. I'm going to hit the shortcut key O, and the most important part is to hit invert right here. To flip that around, make this even bigger, drag this all the way to the top. I'm going to change this feather to right around maybe 70-ish, right through there. And one of the main reasons why I want to use a custom vignette in this scenario is because that bottom right-hand corner was already kind of dark, and I don't want to darken that even more. I really want to darken the other 3 corners, the top left, the top right, and the bottom left, but I want to erase this effect in the bottom right-hand corner. So I'm going to come up here to brush, and I'm going to hit erase, and let's just slightly, or I should say, let's just erase this area right through here because I don't want to make that any darker than it already is. And then let's just bring down the overall exposure. Let me hit the shortcut key O to turn that mask off. And let's see what that looks like. Close this down, make it full screen. And let's just toggle this effect on and off. I think that looks good there. Just a little bit. Let me go back to that radial adjustment one more time because I want to actually remove some of this down here as well. Brush. I'm going to change that flow to around 50%. And just take a couple, whoops, I forgot to hit erase. A couple swipes right through this area here. And I think that looks good. And let's toggle this overall edit before and after. So this is before and after, before and after. So now that we have edited both of these photos, we did one utilizing only sliders, only having global adjustments applied. And now this image right here has only filters applied, only local adjustments. And let's compare the two of these. Go back up here to library, go to the grid here. Let's highlight both of these and do the compare. And as you can see, there is a complete difference in these two images right through here. This image right here has a lot more kind of a lot more punch to the overall photograph. You get more 3-dimension right through here in the overall C stack. You can see that. This image looks a little bit more flat because we just used shadow recovery and increased the black point to really kind of bring up those shadows, which did it globally across everything. So you don't get that kind of 3-dimensional look of the C-stacks like you do in this version right here, because you have the lighter side versus the darker side, which this one right here, it's all kind of bright right through there. This is the version that has that kind of hot spot. This is the side that has is all the slider adjustments. So these are all the global adjustments versus the actual local adjustments. You can see how we were able to make that wave kind of pop and see how it kind of gets lost in transition or lost in the overall photograph here. And look at how all the foreground water really comes to life. And in this one, it just looks very flat and very dull. And that's because in the image where we use the sliders, we use that highlight recovery to kind of bring back a lot of detail in the sky, but it just really made the overall image much darker, much dimmer. We also had to reduce the exposure in that image as well. So utilizing the local adjustments in this version right here, you can really see a massive difference. And we basically did the exact same techniques. We just did one with global adjustments and one with local adjustments. So I thought that this was an extremely powerful exercise to go through. I learned a lot, but I've never actually compared the two before to see the end results. And it was a very, very exciting. And it made me realize that utilizing local adjustments versus global adjustments is hands down the way to go. So I hope that you did get some helpful information out of that video as well. Something that might steer you more towards using local adjustments if you're not already using them in your own post-processing workflow. It's definitely worth trying out and testing out and possibly getting a little bit more comfortable with. So I really do hope that was helpful. And before I do wrap up this week's video, I do want to say just a real big thanks again to the sponsor of this week's video, which is Squarespace, who I use for all of my website and e-commerce needs. Squarespace provides a dynamic and attractive online platform to create your website. You can display your photography using Squarespace's professional portfolio designs and customize the layout and look and feel of your gallery just so you can make it your own. With Squarespace's traffic overview feature, you can track trends in page visits and views to better optimize your content, and you can even grow and engage with your customers with Squarespace's email campaign tools, which will enable you to create engaging emails that match your website with your products or blog post and logo, just so your messaging remains consistent. So if you're looking to start a new website or possibly upgrade your current website, check out squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So like I mentioned, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Hope you got a little bit of helpful information out of it that you can apply to your post-processing moving forward. As always, if you have any questions about anything, leave them in the comments section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.